Hello, everybody. Welcome. And I hope you are enjoying all the sessions at Comp. Me personally, there's so much content out there that I know I'm going to have to go back and replay some of the on-demand sessions. And I hope you do the same because this content is amazing. Being a Splunker and even in the community, it is a powerful way to learn how to get more out of Splunk technology. So right now, what I want to do is get a little personal. I want to talk about why are we doing this? Why are we even here? Why do all of these conversations matter? And a big part of why it matters is actually very personal to you as a techie and an engineering team. During the last 2 years in the COVID time, I think very clearly about 3 separate applications that I subscribe to and quickly unsubscribe to. And when I think about the quality of those applications and the services they provide, the content was amazing. As a matter of fact, one of them was an online learning platform for my daughters. The content was probably superior. And the fitness one, the content was decent. It was good enough. It was good enough for me to pay for it. So why did I unsubscribe? I unsubscribed, and I'm sure you've experienced this yourself, because I could tell that the application itself was not keeping pace with my expectations, which, hey, my expectations could be through the roof. And I didn't have confidence in the future of the quality of the application. So I clicked that cancel button. And the thing that you have to realize as an engineer, and as you think about all the things it takes to build better software faster, is that your application is a reflection of you and your team. Now that gets really, really personal really fast, and it should, because the reality is, as an engineer, your career growth is predicated on the success of the environment and the application that you are building today. Every time a user accesses your application, they're voting. They're voting with their experience, they're voting with their subscription, they're voting with their engagement, or potentially how they respond to your application into the market. And so having this understanding is really important because it can feel like you're living in a silo. If you're a DevOps engineer, it can feel like you're living in an automation silo. If you're a developer, it might feel like your backlog, your ticketing system is dictating your environment in your life. But it's much more than that. Even the smallest functionality that you're building is impacting your users and your organization. My name is Chris Riley. I am a senior technology advocate at Splunk. What does that mean? Well, I said quality of application. It basically means that I was not a great developer, but I could not give up the application development lifecycle and the processes involved in building better applications faster. So that's what I talk about. I talk to unicorn companies. I talk to companies who are running monolithic applications, all to better understand how can we all improve how we build better applications. If you want to learn more from me, you can scan that QR code and it'll get access to my podcast and my various information. So what I really want to detail here today, and hopefully you walk away with a good understanding of a framework of what does a high-performing engineering team look like. So again, those 3 services or applications that I unsubscribed from during COVID, or still now COVID, I don't think that any of the engineering managers in those organizations would say that they hired bad developers. I think most engineering teams believe that they have the best talent. Like, why would you hire bad talent? So what is the difference between a high-performing engineering team and a low-performing engineering team? Because for techies in particular, it's pretty obvious. The output of that environment really represents the team that's behind it. And I'm sure that you've accessed an application where you thought about this yourself. And so how I've drawn these conclusions that I'm presenting to you today is over the last 2 years, there were 43 separate companies that I engaged with. A total of 32 virtual events where I collected information. and 26 hands-on interviews with customers and prospects, both unicorns and legacy enterprises. And also those 3 personal experiences with applications that I just did not see the quality meet up with the service that I was paying for. And here are the 5 elements that I've identified and that I've seen even in Splunk engineering teams that make us very successful, that are part of all high-performing engineering teams. So the first one is they operationalize culture. What does that mean? Culture exists no matter what. You know, at Splunk, we call it being Splunky. Culture exists, but are you deliberate about it? If you're not deliberate about it, then culture is not a part of your strategy. You just let it evolve on its own. You have to be deliberate about your culture. They offer psychological safety and they invest in diversity. They are full stack aware. They have a practice of observability and they make transformation a feature, not an afterthought, not a project they do later. So now I'm going to dig into all of these. So what does operationalized culture mean? Well, again, I was saying is that culture exists no matter what. So you can just let that happen, or you can be deliberate about the culture. No, culture doesn't mean pink blazers and hoodies, although that's probably the only 2 pieces of clothing you'll ever find me in, a Splunk t-shirt, of course. No, culture is something that drives the teams. It's the coherence. It's the glue that brings the teams together. It breaks through visibility silos. It's actually a very tactical thing that you can quantify. How do you quantify it? The output of the application that is produced via those teams. Because like I said, no engineering manager is going to say, I hired bad developers. So what's the difference? So the organizations that operationalize culture, and this is a very difficult thing, and I start with it because I'm just obsessed with this idea that something so nuanced can have such a direct impact on the business. The way that they're doing it is first embracing the SRE engineering model, not just renaming a team SRE. They're actually bringing in the SRE practice, an organization that is an operational partner to the engineering team. They invest in stewardship. They invest in letting developers know what monitoring best practices are, and they help support this idea of shift left. The next thing that they're doing is they're making the data visible. And they're not just focusing on what happens in production. They're focusing on the data, the visibility that happens in the delivery chain. There's some sessions about this, one with Doug Urkala on pipeline analytics in GitHub, that I suggest that you watch, because pipeline analytics is not a complicated thing. What is it? It visualizes the success and the velocity of your delivery chain. And almost everybody can get on board with that, releasing application faster with less issues. They treat monitoring as a product. So the monitoring organization, those teams responsible for controlling the monitoring tools and access to those tools, they treat it like a product and they deliver that product to the organization. They have roadmaps. They're not just thinking about it as an afterthought, and they're not just there to build dashboards. And they improve their hiring tactics. Seems obvious, right? We have the luxury of Splunk is every engineer hired knows they're going to be on call for the applications they build. It's not even a question. The problem is a lot of engineering managers do not do justice to their recruiting team to make sure that they hire that top talent. Now, psychological safety and diversity. What does this mean? It really means that I can walk into the office every day and be myself. I don't have to think about all the things that I have to check at the door and worry and allow those to grind on me. I can just be myself. Well, not only is this important for the organization, for the well-being of the employees and having the ability to, just be comfortable, it actually allows you to optimize and maximize their superpowers, because especially in the tech industry, you'll find that people with ADHD, for example, like I have, actually have talent and skills that come with it that you're not going to find if you just shut that down and hamper it. It's true also with dyslexia. I have dyslexia, and I've noticed that my dyslexia makes it makes my ability to get big picture concepts a lot easier. So to activate those powers, you have to allow them to exist and you have to foster them. So of course, I'm sure you've heard of this term, blameless postmortems. It's an easy thing to throw out there and say, but what does it really mean? It means that when challenges come up, they're the organization's challenges. They're not an individual's challenges. And everybody is working collectively to make things better and understand them, truly understand them. So this comes in your post-incident reviews. It comes in your PI planning, everything involved in the strategy and of your environment. And by the way, this is all part of building resilience. Also having safe places. Yes, it's uncomfortable to talk about ADHD and dyslexia, but you should have a place where that conversation can happen and be an outlet. At Splunk, one of the communities that I belong to is the neurodiversity group. Speaking of diversity, you can't have free-flowing ideas without having a diverse organization. So you have to invest in that. Diversity is not just this thing of thinking about just building equality across your organization. That is absolutely critical. It is also making sure that the diverse backgrounds of all the people out there are brought into your organization, because that's where ideas come from. If you only invest in the same system, in the same mode of operation, you'll only get the same results. And it's very hard to address challenges. There's an extreme lack of creativity. So diversity is absolutely key, and key to investing in the engineering teams. So psychological safety is not just feeling comfortable. It impacts the bottom line. Diversity impacts the bottom line. So the next thing I want to talk about is full stack awareness. And I see this as being a real tactical challenge for a lot of organizations. We've heard the term full stack engineer, and the reality is all engineers specialize in one area. But sometimes that specialization pigeonholes us, and we know this. And so you always have to be fighting, especially as an individual engineer and teams, to make sure that you have the broader picture. You understand how your application impacts your users. You understand how your application impacts the business, because that only helps you. It helps you with career growth, but it helps you be a better engineer. So when developers say things like, I instrumented my logs, my job is done, not my problem, they're fully neglecting how everything comes together. And it will come back to bite you, because the reality is everybody is on call always. If something bad happens with your production and you have a P1 incident, everybody in the organization is impacted, and it could potentially impact your career into the future. So full stack awareness is expecting developers to understand the full stack of the environment, the automation, the tools that are taken to build the application, the testing that happens, how it's monitored in production, how all of those are weaved together with proper visibility. And this is all meant to support the concept of, first, shift left. How do you move things that typically happened in production earlier in the delivery chain so they cost less to address and they are more effective and easier to do? For example, security, testing, visibility. The other thing, and many organizations have not embraced this yet, but they should be a North Star, is if you build it, you support it. At Splunk, our engineers support the services that they build, and the SREs will support third-party services. This model works out really well because the developers, the engineers, are the best ones suited to resolve an incident, which means they will resolve it faster. And it shortens the feedback loop of what happens in production back into your backlog. So absolutely important. The other thing I feel like a lot of engineers neglect and don't realize is understanding the impact of toil. Understanding the impact of the time an engineer is spending not on building applications. Because the reality is those who are investing in full stack awareness and culture and SRE are trying to reduce that amount of time of unplanned work or toil. And that helps developers. Think about in the last 2 years, how many times did you have to delay a sprint? That was all because of toil. So really goffing the impact, the cost, the impact on the business of toil is absolutely critical. So being full stack aware means everybody on the engineering team is on the same page of the environment being used, on the same page of being tools. Speaking of tools, the one reason why organizations have tool sprawl is because they're not full stack aware. They don't care what other teams are doing. They just neglect that. There's a lot of ways to do this, and there's a lot of ways also to bring culture into this. One of the ways that I've seen done a lot that's super successful in large enterprises is running dojos, running camps where everybody gets on the same page. Running hackathons are super fun, but it's also a point where everybody can come together and communicate. So the next thing I want to talk about is this term observability. Hey, you're at Comp. You've heard the term observability. We talk about it all the time. If you're a good curmudgeon like me, as soon as you hear a new industry term, you think to yourself, man, another one? Really? Do we really need another term? Isn't this just monitoring? I'm going to go on a limb and say, yes, it's monitoring. It's a practice of monitoring. That's what observability is. Observability didn't just show up one day. It comes from the networking world and the manufacturing world. And it means that in complex systems, the best way to understand what's happening in that system is to look at the output. So yes, it's monitoring. Observability is what you do in production to make sure that cloud native applications are running as they should. But the reason we use this term observability, and if you're really cool, you'll call it OLLI or O11Y, all those kind of members only club versions of it, is because it's a new problem space. Where we used to have that one server, the Billy Bob server that we restarted every other day because it always got a disk full error, we can't do that. The relationship and the dependencies in our applications change. They're unknown. There's no way for the operator to hold in their minds a visual representation of the system. You can't just create a reference architecture and expect that to be the go-to point all of the time. So that's why we have this new term wrapped around monitoring to say the problem space is new. It's difficult. We're solving a bigger challenge, and we need a term to address that. But observability is just that. It's a term. It's a practice. The tactics inside of that are many. And we look at it from the fact of what observability brings to us. It's visibility. It should be visibility from infrastructure all the way up to your front end. Infrastructure with infrastructure monitoring. Applications, APIs with APM. Then front end with real user monitoring in synthetics. Everything should be weaved together. And as you can see, and if you're kind of putting this all together of what Splunk's doing, we're focused on creating that thread and weaving it through the entire tech stack. So first of all, observability starts with the data. Logs, obviously, but we also add this new data set, traces and spans. So you have to instrument for that. Speaking of instrumentation, it's a development and deployment strategy because you need to make sure that instrumentation exists. You have to have all of those critical components in place so that you are getting the right signals and telemetry from your application and your infrastructure into your monitoring tools. It's approach to monitoring. And finally, it's the tooling to make that complexity easier. So for example, and I beat up on instrumentation because it's so absolutely critical that everybody participate in high quality instrumentation. Splunk is super committed to the open source project OpenTelemetry as the best way to do that, and what I hope becomes the standard way to do that. It is for our observability cloud. Why? Because it allows you to create consistency across your teams and your organization without being tethered to the configuration of your monitoring tools. One does not dictate the other. In many organizations, and I've seen that their agents and their instrumentation actually dictates how they monitor. It's the inhibiting factor. That doesn't seem to make sense. So open telemetry is a powerful way to do that and get all of your data into your monitoring tool, as well as performing powerful logic in stream. But you also have to get your instrument engineering teams to be consistent about this. So they can do it agent-based, they can use auto instrumentation libraries, they can do it in code. Each has their pros and cons, but it allows you to create consistency across the organization. Once you have the best data going into your monitoring tools, that is where you need the capabilities around application performance monitoring, real user monitoring, and infrastructure monitoring to bring it all together and visualize it. And the goal here is that you should not be staring at dashboards like you do in the NOC, the traditional NOC model. That data should be pushed to you with a true incident response strategy and on-call. So observability is not for all applications. It's not. Sometimes your monolithic application should be monitored in the way that has worked best for them. When you for sure have to embrace observability is when those boundaries between your infrastructure, your application infrastructure, which is Kubernetes, your application, your front end, your configurations, your code, they all blur and they're stateless and ephemeral. When logs and metrics are not enough, where you need more context, not only do you need to monitor the services, you need to monitor the relationship of the services and the data sent between those services and the latency between those services and all their dependencies. And as applications are increasingly distributed, especially in microservices environment. So a true practice of observability means that you understand that latency is the same as downtime, that your application has to be performant on all aspects of the application, not just is it up or down. That you have the best instrumentation, like I said, with open telemetry to get the data into your application and make sure that you have top-notch data to be able to observe and have the visibility you need into all aspects of the application. You have an observability center of excellence, often driven by your monitoring team or your SRE team. They are responsible for owning things like a service maturity model and a service onboarding checklist that make sure that every service that comes into production is as observable as possible. And they create a measurement of visibility. I like to refer to this measurement as code to cloud visibility, which is how do you make sure that from the point a feature is defined to the point that feature is running in production, that you have seen every step of the way. You can use that as a metric just like you do with test coverage. So the last thing I want to leave with you in these 5 key elements of high-performing engineering teams is that they treat transformation as a feature. Most organizations I encounter, all of them are going through transformation, but most of them treat transformation as an afterthought, that thing that they deal with after the transformation has happened, right? But if you think of transformation as a part of your system, it's a lot more powerful because organizations are transforming always. Large enterprises will always have a monolith and maybe start to get their cloud native applications. And they may have some applications that they're refactoring. This is always happening. It's always happening. It's not a one-time project you can do and expect to be done because by the time you're done, you're going to be transforming again. So if you think of transformation as a feature, then you can start to build out the elements that are required as a part of your delivery chain. What does that mean? Developers, you can actually put visibility components in your backlog. You can start to think about the new functionality you're building and in the ticketing system as a part of the feature list, how am I making this observable? How am I making this visible? So that by the time the project is done, you have something to measure. Otherwise, you won't. Visibility is always 2 steps ahead. Don't think about visibility as an afterthought. You can't measure something and the success of a project unless you've already built the visibility in advance. That includes instrumentation. You have to get away from this idea that you're just chasing chat dashboards. You have to think about a strategy of transformation and that it's always there. Because if you're only working retroactively to build dashboards, your transformation has already controlled you versus you controlling it. And you simply just have to be more strategic. So thank you so much for joining me today and helping me explore these 5 key areas where high-performing engineering teams are truly making their application a reflection of their team, a positive reflection of their team. Before I leave you, I did talk a lot about OpenTelemetry, and we have a real fun OpenTelemetry game called Pipestorm. You can access it in the data playground in the comp interface, or you can go to pipestorm.splunk.com. It's a fun way to learn OpenTelemetry, enter it into a drawing, and get a t-shirt as well. Have a great day. Enjoy the sessions. Come back and watch the on-demand sessions because there's so much rich content here. And everybody who put this together, Splunk TV, everything, it is a lot of work, folks. So please thank them as well because it has been a fantastic event. So have a great day. Bye-bye.